Welcome and thank you for joining me tonight for another restful story from long ago. As the world outside grows still, I invite you to slow down and settle in for a soft journey through history's quieter corners. Tell me, if you'd like, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? It's a lovely thought. All of us scattered across time zones, sharing this moment. If you enjoy falling asleep to stories like this, consider subscribing. There's so much more we'll uncover together in the nights to come. Picture this. You're walking through the marble corridors of a palace that makes Versailles look like a garden shed. The air is thick with frankincense and myrrh, exotic perfumes that cost more than most people's annual income. Golden statues of gods and goddesses line the walls, their eyes seeming to follow your every move. And somewhere in these opulent chambers, history's most powerful rulers are orchestrating love stories so scandalous they were talking about a world where a single would make modern tabloids blush. A kiss could start a war, where marriages were strategic weapons more powerful than any army, and where the bedroom was quite literally the most dangerous room in the palace. These weren't just random hookups or casual flings. These were calculated seductions that reshaped the ancient world, love affairs that built empires and brought them crashing down. Now, you might be thinking, come on, how seductive could ancient Egypt really be? Weren't they just mummified pharaohs obsessed with the afterlife? Well, prepare to have your mind completely blown, because what I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about ancient Egyptian romance. We're talking about a civilization that invented luxury as we know it, where seduction was an art form more refined than anything we see today. In this deep dive, I'm going to walk you through the most jaw-dropping stories of passion, betrayal, and political intrigue that unfolded along the banks of the Nile. We'll explore how Cleopatra didn't just seduce Julius Caesar and Mark Antony with her beauty, but with an arsenal of psychological tactics so sophisticated they would make modern dating coaches jealous. We'll uncover the secret chambers where pharaohs conducted their most intimate affairs, and I'll show you exactly how these ancient rulers used love as their ultimate weapon of mass destruction. But first, let me give you a taste of just how wild things could get in these royal courts. Picture Queen Nefertiti, one of the most beautiful women who ever lived, orchestrating a religious revolution that shook the foundations of Egyptian society, all while navigating a marriage so complex it involved multiple wives, political alliances, and enough palace intrigue to fill a dozen Netflix series. Or imagine Hatshepsut, the woman who declared herself pharaoh and ruled Egypt for over 20 years, using her feminine charm and political cunning to maintain power in a world dominated by men. These weren't just powerful women playing dress-up. These were master manipulators who understood that in ancient Egypt, sexuality and politics were inseparably intertwined. Every glance, every touch, every whispered conversation carried the weight of entire kingdoms. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the players couldn't have been more skilled. What makes this even more fascinating is that we're not talking about primitive cave dwellers here. Ancient Egypt was a technological and cultural superpower that lasted for over 3,000 years. They built monuments that still baffle engineers today, developed medicine that was centuries ahead of its time, and created a society so sophisticated that their beauty techniques, fashion sense, and romantic customs influenced civilizations across the Mediterranean. So how did they do it? How did these ancient rulers master the art of seduction in ways that modern society can barely comprehend? The answer lies in understanding that Egyptian courts weren't just centers of political power. They were carefully orchestrated theaters of desire, where every element was designed to overwhelm the senses and cloud judgment. Let's start with the physical setting, because context is everything when it comes to seduction. Imagine walking into the palace of Ramesses the Great at Pi-Ramesses. You're immediately hit with an assault on your senses that would make Vegas look subtle. The floors are made of polished granite that reflects the flickering light of hundreds of oil lamps. The walls are covered in intricate hieroglyphs, painted in gold leaf and lapis lazuli, telling stories of divine love, and cosmic passion. But here's where it gets really interesting. Every single detail in these palaces was designed with seduction in mind. The Egyptians understood psychology in ways that would make modern behavioral scientists jealous. They knew that scent triggers memory and emotion more powerfully than any other sense. So they burned different incenses in different rooms to create specific moods. Cedar for strength and protection, lotus for rebirth and sensuality, cinnamon for passion and desire. The lighting was another crucial element. They positioned mirrors and polished metals to create a soft golden glow that made everyone look like they were touched by the gods themselves. And speaking of gods, Egyptian religion was deeply intertwined with sexuality. Their creation myths literally began with masturbation and divine orgasms. This wasn't a repressed puritanical society. This was a culture that saw sexual pleasure as a sacred act, a way of connecting with the divine forces that governed the universe. Now, let's talk about the main players in this game of ancient seduction, starting with the person who literally wrote the playbook on political romance, Cleopatra VII. But here's what most people don't realize about Cleopatra. She wasn't actually Egyptian. She was Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals who took over Egypt after Alexander's death. And she wasn't even considered particularly beautiful by the standards of her time. So how did she become history's most famous seductress? How did she convince two of Rome's most powerful generals to risk everything for her? The answer isn't what you think. Cleopatra was a master of what we might call psychological seduction. She understood that true attraction isn't about physical beauty. It's about creating an irresistible fantasy that makes someone believe you're the key to everything they've ever wanted. When Julius Caesar first arrived in Alexandria, he was expecting to meet a desperate queen begging for Roman protection. Instead, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into his presence wrapped in a carpet, creating an entrance so dramatic and unexpected that it immediately shifted the power dynamic. She wasn't the supplicant, she was the prize. From that moment, Caesar wasn't just meeting with a foreign ruler, he was being seduced by a living goddess. But Cleopatra's genius went far beyond theatrical entrances. She spoke 9 languages fluently and was educated in mathematics, philosophy, rhetoric, and debate. She could discuss Roman politics with Caesar in Latin, then switch to discussing Egyptian theology in ancient Greek, then pivot to talking about trade routes in Aramaic. She made herself intellectually indispensable, which is the deepest form of seduction possible. And here's the kicker. She did all of this while managing one of the most complex political situations in ancient history. Egypt was caught between the rising power of Rome and its own 3,000-year-old traditions. The Egyptian people saw their pharaoh as a living god, but the Romans saw Egypt as just another province to be conquered. Cleopatra had to navigate these competing expectations while maintaining her independence, her throne, and her life. The palace where all this political romance played out was itself a character in the story. The Great Palace of Alexandria was built on a peninsula that jutted into the Mediterranean, surrounded by water on 3 sides. The royal quarters were positioned to catch the sea breeze, keeping them cool even in the scorching Egyptian summer. The walls were made of white limestone that reflected the sunlight during the day and glowed like silver in the moonlight. But the real magic happened in the private chambers. Cleopatra's personal suite included a sunken bath made of pink granite that could hold hundreds of gallons of water infused with rose petals, milk, and honey. The ceiling was painted to look like the night sky, complete with constellations that moved throughout the evening thanks to a complex system of rotating panels. Imagine trying to conduct serious political negotiations while soaking in a bath that made you feel like you were floating among the stars. This wasn't just luxury for its own sake. Every element was designed to create a sense of otherworldly experience that would make visitors question whether they were still in the mortal realm or had somehow ascended to the domain of the gods. And in a world where pharaohs were considered divine, this psychological manipulation was incredibly effective. The dining experiences were equally calculated. Egyptian royal feasts weren't just about food, they were full sensory experiences designed to overwhelm and seduce. Tables made of ebony and inlaid with ivory held platters of roasted gazelle, honeyed duck, and exotic fruits imported from across Africa and the Mediterranean. Musicians played harps and flutes, while dancers performed routines that were equal parts religious ritual and erotic display. But the real genius of Egyptian court seduction lay in something far more sophisticated than mere luxury. These rulers understood that true power came from creating an atmosphere where reality itself became negotiable. The palace walls were covered in hieroglyphs that told stories of divine love affairs between gods and mortals, constantly reinforcing the idea that passionate romance was not just acceptable, but cosmically ordained. Take the story of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, arguably the most revolutionary couple in ancient history. Akhenaten wasn't just a pharaoh who changed Egypt's religion from polytheism to monotheism. He was a ruler who used his marriage as a weapon of cultural transformation. Their court at Amarna became a laboratory for redefining not just how Egyptians worshipped, but how they loved. The palace at Amarna was unlike anything Egypt had ever seen before. Instead of the dark, mysterious chambers traditional in Egyptian architecture, Akhenaten and Nefertiti designed open courtyards flooded with sunlight. They commissioned art that showed them kissing, embracing, and playing with their children in ways that were shockingly intimate for royal propaganda. This wasn't just personal preference. This was political theatre designed to show their subjects that divine love could be passionate, tender, and deeply human. Nefertiti herself was a master of what we might call strategic vulnerability. While previous queens had maintained an aura of untouchable divinity, she allowed herself to be depicted in moments of genuine emotion. Sculptures show her laughing, crying, and gazing adoringly at her husband. But here's the brilliant part. These displays of emotion made her seem more relatable while simultaneously emphasizing her otherworldly beauty. She became the perfect woman that everyone could identify with, but no one could actually attain. The couple's bedroom chambers were designed around a revolutionary concept for Egyptian architecture: natural light. Most royal quarters were built deep within palace complexes, lit only by oil lamps and torches. But Nefertiti and Akhenaten's private rooms featured large windows that could be opened to let in the morning sun. They slept on a bed carved from a single piece of cedar and decorated with gold inlays that caught and reflected the sunlight throughout the day. This wasn't just about comfort. In Egyptian theology, sunlight was the physical manifestation of divine love. By literally making love in the light of the sun god, they were positioning their relationship as a sacred act that blessed their entire kingdom. Every intimate moment became a religious ritual. Every kiss became a prayer. Every embrace became a cosmic event that maintained the balance between heaven and earth. But perhaps no Egyptian ruler understood the psychology of seduction better than Hatshepsut, the woman who managed to rule Egypt as pharaoh for over 2 decades in a completely male-dominated society. Her story reveals just how sophisticated ancient Egyptian gender politics really were, and how a brilliant woman could manipulate cultural expectations to achieve the impossible. Hatshepsut's rise to power began when she married her half-brother Thutmose II, a common practice in royal families designed to keep bloodlines pure and prevent succession disputes. When Thutmose died young, his heir was still a child, making Hatshepsut the regent. This is where most royal widows would have gracefully stepped aside once the young pharaoh came of age. Hatshepsut had other plans. She began by gradually incorporating masculine symbols into her royal imagery while maintaining her feminine appeal. Early in her regency, she appeared in traditional queen's clothing, but wore the pharaoh's crown. Then, she started commissioning statues that showed her with a false beard, the traditional symbol of pharaonic authority, while keeping her obviously feminine body shape. She was literally redefining what it meant to be a ruler in Egypt. Her palace at Deir el-Bahari was a masterpiece of architectural seduction. Built into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, it seemed to emerge organically from the rock itself. The approach involved a series of terraced ramps that forced visitors to climb slowly upward, creating a sense of pilgrimage and anticipation. By the time dignitaries reached the main audience chamber, they had been walking for nearly an hour through increasingly elaborate decorations, their hearts pounding from exertion and awe. The throne room itself was positioned to take advantage of a natural acoustic phenomenon. When Hatshepsut spoke from her throne, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the limestone voice of the gods themselves. Walls in ways that made her sound like the imagined being a foreign ambassador, exhausted from the climb, overwhelmed by the architectural magnificence, and then hearing this divine feminine voice seeming to speak directly into your soul. But Hatshepsut's real genius was in how she handled the fundamental contradiction of her position. She was claiming absolute authority in a society that believed pharaohs were male gods incarnate. But she couldn't simply pretend to be a man without losing the very feminine qualities that made her politically unique. So she created an entirely new category: the female pharaoh, who was simultaneously masculine and feminine, mortal and divine, traditional and revolutionary. Her private quarters reflected this duality in fascinating ways. She maintained separate chambers for her roles as pharaoh and as woman. Her official pharaoh suite was decorated with traditional masculine symbols, hunting scenes, military victories, and images of her making offerings to male gods. But her private feminine quarters were filled with cosmetics, jewelry, and intimate furniture designed for entertaining lovers and confidants. The transition between these spaces was marked by a series of antechambers, where she could literally transform from one identity to another. Servants would help her change from the formal regalia of pharaonic authority to the flowing linens and elaborate makeup of Egyptian femininity. She could host a military planning session in the morning as the divine pharaoh, then entertain suitors in the evening as an irresistible woman. This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian court culture: the role of royal concubines and secondary wives. While monogamy might seem romantic to modern sensibilities, Egyptian rulers understood that political marriage was far too important to leave to chance or personal preference. A pharaoh's harem wasn't just a collection of beautiful women. It was a carefully curated diplomatic corps, where each woman represented an alliance, a territory, or a political faction. The harem quarters at Memphis were like a small city within the palace complex. Each major wife had her own suite of rooms, her own servants, and her own political responsibilities. But this wasn't a prison where women competed desperately for the pharaoh's attention. It was more like an elite finishing school where the most intelligent and ambitious women in the kingdom learned statecraft, diplomacy, and the subtle arts of influence. Consider the daily routine in these harem quarters. Mornings began with elaborate beauty rituals that could take hours to complete. Women would bathe in pools filled with water, infused with rose petals and aromatic oils, then spend time applying makeup that was both cosmetic and magical. Egyptian cosmetics weren't just about looking attractive. They were believed to have protective properties that could ward off evil spirits and enhance the wearer's natural charisma. The kohl that lined their eyes wasn't just dramatic makeup. It was made from antimony and lead compounds that were thought to give the wearer the ability to see into men's souls. The red ochre on their lips was believed to make their words more persuasive and their kisses more memorable. Even their nail polish had mystical properties, with different colors representing different magical intentions. But the real education happened in the afternoon salons, where these women would gather to discuss politics, philosophy, and strategy. The pharaoh's wives weren't just decorative ornaments waiting for their turn in the royal bed. They were active participants in governing the kingdom, each bringing intelligence networks, economic resources, and diplomatic connections from their home regions. When a pharaoh visited the harem quarters, he wasn't just indulging in personal pleasure, he was conducting state business in the most intimate possible setting. A casual conversation over wine might determine military strategy. A pillow talk session might result in new trade agreements. A romantic dinner might decide the fate of entire provinces. The architecture of these intimate spaces was designed to facilitate exactly this kind of multifaceted interaction. Rooms flowed seamlessly from formal audience chambers to intimate dining spaces to private bedchambers. A conversation could begin with the pharaoh receiving an official report from one of his wives about conditions in her home province, then gradually transition to personal matters as they moved from public spaces to increasingly private ones. The furniture itself was designed to blur the lines between business and pleasure. Beds that could also serve as conference tables, bathing pools that were also spaces for private diplomatic meetings. Even the gardens were designed with hidden alcoves where sensitive political discussions could take place under the pretense of romantic strolls. This integration of sexuality and statecraft reached its peak during the reign of Ramesses II, who ruled Egypt for 67 years and fathered over 100 children with dozens of wives and concubines. His palace at Pyramesses was essentially a small city dedicated to the proposition that royal pleasure and political power were inseparable. The scale of Ramesses' romantic operations was staggering. His main palace complex covered over 25 square kilometers and housed not just his immediate family, but an entire ecosystem of wives, concubines, children, servants, advisors, and diplomatic guests. The harem quarters alone employed over 1,000 people, from beauticians and musicians to teachers and spies. But Ramesses understood that managing this complex web of relationships required more than just royal authority. It required genuine charm, emotional intelligence, and an almost superhuman ability to make each person feel special and valued. His private chambers were equipped with detailed records of every woman's preferences, family background, political connections, and personal history. He could greet a minor wife by name, ask about her sick mother, and remember exactly which type of wine she preferred. This wasn't just impressive memory. It was calculated seduction on an industrial scale. By making each woman feel individually cherished and politically important, Ramesses created a network of loyalty that extended far beyond the palace walls. Every wife became an ambassador for his reign in her home region. Every concubine became a source of intelligence about potential threats or opportunities. The daily schedule in Ramesses' palace read like a masterclass in time management and emotional manipulation. He would begin each day with official court business, demonstrating his authority and competence to visiting dignitaries. Then he would transition to private meetings with his most politically important wives, discussing regional affairs and strategic planning. Afternoons were reserved for more casual interactions with concubines and secondary wives, maintaining personal relationships and gathering informal intelligence. Evenings were when the real magic happened. Ramesses would host elaborate dinner parties where the guest list was carefully calculated to create interesting social dynamics. A Nubian princess might find herself dining with a Mesopotamian diplomat's daughter and one of his Egyptian high priestess wives. These weren't random social gatherings. They were carefully orchestrated opportunities for cultural exchange, alliance building, and intelligence gathering. The dining halls themselves were designed to facilitate exactly this kind of complex social interaction. Tables were arranged in intimate clusters rather than formal rows, encouraging private conversations while maintaining the pharaoh's ability to observe and participate in multiple discussions simultaneously. The lighting was dim enough to create romantic atmosphere, but bright enough for subtle facial expressions and body language to be clearly visible. Musicians and dancers provided entertainment that was simultaneously artistic, religious, and erotic. Egyptian court performances weren't just aesthetic experiences. They were elaborate metaphors for cosmic themes of creation, death, and rebirth that reinforced the pharaoh's divine status while creating an atmosphere of sensual transcendence. As the evening progressed and wine flowed more freely, these gatherings would naturally fragment into smaller, more intimate groupings. The pharaoh might find himself in deep conversation with a particularly insightful concubine about trade conditions along the Red Sea coast, while across the room his chief wife was networking with foreign princesses about potential military alliances. This is where the true genius of Egyptian court seduction becomes apparent. It wasn't really about sex at all. It was about creating an environment so intoxicating, so intellectually stimulating, and so emotionally fulfilling that the most powerful people in the ancient world would do anything to remain part of it. The physical pleasure was just the surface layer of a much deeper psychological and political strategy. The sleeping arrangements alone revealed just how sophisticated these psychological operations really were. Ramesses didn't simply rotate through his wives like some ancient playboy checking items off a list. Each romantic encounter was a carefully choreographed event designed to achieve specific political and emotional outcomes. His bedchambers were equipped with different settings that could be adjusted based on the woman he was entertaining and the message he wanted to send. For his most politically powerful wives, he maintained formal chambers decorated with symbols of their shared authority. Golden hieroglyphs covered the walls, telling stories of their joint rule and divine partnership. The bed itself was positioned on a raised platform, emphasizing their elevated status above ordinary mortals. These encounters weren't just intimate, they were state ceremonies that reinforced the cosmic order of Egyptian society. But for his younger concubines and foreign princesses, he used entirely different spaces designed to create feelings of wonder and submission. These chambers featured walls painted with scenes from Egyptian mythology, showing gods and goddesses in passionate embrace. The lighting was softer, more mysterious, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that made visitors feel like they had entered the realm of the divine. The transition between these different romantic personas required incredible emotional agility. Ramesses had to be simultaneously the authoritative pharaoh commanding respect, the tender lover inspiring devotion, the diplomatic partner negotiating alliances, and the divine god-king maintaining cosmic balance. Modern psychology recognizes this kind of identity flexibility as a hallmark of exceptional leadership. But Ramesses was mastering it 3,000 years before anyone had words for these concepts. What made this even more remarkable was the sheer logistical complexity involved. Managing romantic relationships with dozens of women while running one of the world's most powerful empires required systems that would challenge modern corporate executives. Each wife had her own household staff, her own budget, her own political agenda, and her own expectations for attention and resources. The palace scribes maintained detailed records of gift-giving, visit schedules, pregnancy tracking, and even emotional temperature readings for each relationship. They knew which wives were currently happy, which ones were feeling neglected, which foreign princesses needed extra attention to maintain their father's military alliances, and which concubines were showing signs of political ambition that might require careful management. This brings us to one of the most fascinating and dangerous aspects of Egyptian court life, the constant threat of romantic conspiracy. When love affairs could topple dynasties and bedroom politics could reshape international relations, every kiss carried the potential for treason. Palace walls literally had ears, in the form of a sophisticated spy network that monitored romantic activities for signs of political plotting. The story of Queen Tai, wife of Amenhotep III, illustrates just how deadly these romantic intrigues could become. Tiye wasn't content to simply be another royal wife producing heirs and looking beautiful at state functions. She positioned herself as her husband's chief political advisor, gradually accumulating power that rivaled the pharaoh himself. Her private apartments became an alternative court, where dissatisfied nobles and ambitious priests would gather to discuss policy and plot against their enemies. But Tai's real genius lay in understanding that information was the ultimate aphrodisiac. She created a network of female spies throughout the palace who would report back on conversations, relationships, and political developments. A casual comment from a concubine about her home province's grain harvest might reveal potential famine conditions. A foreign princess's homesickness might indicate her father's growing dissatisfaction with Egyptian policies. This intelligence network operated through the very systems designed for romantic pleasure. The communal baths where women gossiped while beautifying themselves became informal intelligence briefings. The evening entertainment sessions where musicians and dancers performed became opportunities to observe foreign dignitaries' reactions to subtle political messages embedded in the performances. The massage chambers where palace women relaxed after long ceremonial events became confession booths, where alcohol and physical relaxation loosened tongues and revealed secrets. Even the gardens where couples strolled during romantic encounters were equipped with hidden alcoves where trained listeners could overhear and record conversations. TA's bedroom itself was a masterpiece of surveillance technology disguised as luxury furniture. The ornate bed frame contained hidden compartments where scribes could hide and record conversations. The decorative mirrors were positioned to provide clear sight lines to observers concealed behind specially designed wall panels. Even the oil lamps were designed to cast shadows that would reveal the facial expressions and body language of anyone in the room. But the most sophisticated element of her operation was psychological. Tia understood that the most valuable intelligence comes from people who don't realize they're being interrogated. She perfected the art of intimate conversation that felt spontaneous and emotionally authentic, while actually being carefully structured to extract specific information. A typical evening with Queen Tai might begin with wine and casual conversation about family matters, gradually transitioning to discussions of regional politics as she asked seemingly innocent questions about conditions in her guest's homeland. By the time the conversation moved to more intimate topics, her companion would be so emotionally invested in the interaction that they would reveal far more than they intended. This technique was so effective that foreign diplomats began requesting audiences with Tia specifically, believing they could manipulate her feminine emotions to gain political advantages. They had no idea they were walking into the web of one of history's most skilled intelligence operators, someone who could make them feel like the most fascinating person in the world, while systematically extracting every piece of useful information they possessed. The physical spaces where these psychological operations took place were themselves works of art designed to lower psychological defenses. Tia's private dining chamber featured walls covered in scenes of pastoral Egyptian life, farmers harvesting grain, fishermen casting nets, children playing in village squares. These images created a sense of nostalgia and emotional warmth that made visitors feel safe and unguarded. The furniture was arranged to create intimate conversation nooks where two people could speak privately while remaining visible to the rest of the room. This gave guests the illusion of privacy, while actually ensuring that their conversations could be observed and, when necessary, interrupted if they moved into dangerous territory. The serving staff were all trained in subtle observation techniques, able to remember and report exact conversations while appearing to be focused solely on their duties. A servant pouring wine might position themselves to overhear a crucial exchange about military movements. A musician might adjust their performance to cover or enhance specific portions of political discussions. Even the timing of meals was carefully calculated to maximize information gathering. Tia knew that people revealed the most sensitive information during specific emotional states, the relaxation that followed good food and wine, the vulnerability that came with physical exhaustion, the openness that emerged during moments of genuine emotional connection. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these operations was how they balanced genuine affection with calculated manipulation. Tia wasn't simply using people and discarding them. She created real emotional bonds that lasted for decades, relationships that provided both parties with authentic satisfaction while also serving larger political purposes. Her correspondence with foreign queens and princesses reveals a woman who genuinely cared about her allies' personal happiness, while simultaneously using those relationships to advance Egyptian interests. She would send birthday gifts, offer advice about child rearing, provide emotional support during difficult times, and celebrate personal achievements. These weren't just diplomatic gestures. They were investments in long-term relationships that would pay dividends for decades. The palace complex that housed all this romantic intrigue was itself a character in these stories. The royal quarters at Thebes covered nearly 40 acres, with buildings connected by covered walkways that allowed discrete movement between different areas. The architecture was designed to facilitate both public ceremony and private conspiracy, with formal audience halls that could accommodate hundreds of people, alongside intimate chambers suitable for the most sensitive conversations. The gardens were particularly sophisticated, featuring maze-like paths that created opportunities for chance encounters, while also providing multiple escape routes if conversations needed to be ended quickly. Hidden grottos offered complete privacy for the most delicate negotiations, while open pavilions allowed for romantic meetings that appeared spontaneous but were actually carefully orchestrated. The water features weren't just decorative elements. The sound of flowing water provided natural sound masking that prevented conversations from being overheard, while the pools and fountains created opportunities for the kinds of accidental encounters that could blossom into romantic relationships or political alliances. Even the plant selections were strategic. Certain flowers released stronger fragrances at different times of day, allowing skilled operators to schedule meetings when the natural aromatherapy would be most conducive to the emotional state they wanted to create. Jasmine for evening romance, lotus for morning clarity, rose for afternoon negotiations. The lighting systems were equally sophisticated, using combinations of oil lamps, polished metal reflectors, and strategically placed windows to create different moods throughout the day. Dawn meetings bathed in golden sunlight for hope and new beginnings. Afternoon sessions in soft, diffused light for serious discussions. Evening encounters in flickering lamplight for mystery and seduction. But the real masterpiece was the acoustic design. The palace architects understood how sound traveled through different materials and spaces, creating chambers where whispers could be heard clearly across the room, alongside others where normal conversation remained completely private. A skilled operator could position themselves in locations where they could overhear multiple conversations simultaneously while appearing to be focused on something entirely different. The result was a physical environment that seemed designed for pleasure and relaxation, while actually functioning as one of the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operations in the ancient world. Visitors felt pampered and honored while being systematically observed, evaluated, and when necessary, manipulated. This level of sophistication required an army of specialists who understood both human psychology and practical logistics. The palace employed professional courtesans trained in conversation techniques that could extract information without arousing suspicion. They maintained libraries of detailed personality profiles for every significant political figure in the Mediterranean world. They even had specialists in reading body language and facial expressions who could interpret the subtle signals that revealed when someone was lying or concealing important information. The training programs for these specialists were as rigorous as anything found in modern intelligence agencies. New recruits spent months learning to read and write in multiple languages, studying the political histories and cultural customs of different regions, and practicing the social skills necessary to blend seamlessly into high-level diplomatic gatherings. But the most challenging part of their education was learning to maintain their own psychological balance while constantly manipulating others. These operations required people who could form genuine emotional connections while never losing sight of their larger political objectives. They had to be simultaneously authentic and calculating, warm and cold, trustworthy and deceptive. The psychological toll of this lifestyle was enormous. Palace records describe elaborate rituals designed to help operatives maintain their mental health and emotional stability. They had access to priests who specialized in psychological counseling, medical treatments for stress-related ailments, and regular retreats where they could temporarily escape the constant pressure of court intrigue. Yet despite these challenges, The system produced some of history's most remarkable individuals, people who could navigate the most complex political situations with grace and skill, who could inspire genuine loyalty while pursuing ruthless objectives, who could create beauty and pleasure while orchestrating grand strategies that shaped the course of human civilization. The legacy of these ancient seduction masters extended far beyond their own lifetimes. The techniques they developed for combining romance and politics influenced court cultures throughout the Mediterranean world. Greek city-states adopted Egyptian approaches to diplomatic marriage. Roman emperors borrowed palace designs and entertainment formats. Even medieval European courts would eventually incorporate elements that trace back to the romantic innovations of ancient Egypt. But perhaps their most lasting contribution was demonstrating that human sexuality, rather than being something separate from serious political and intellectual activity, could actually be integrated with statecraft in ways that enhanced both. They proved that pleasure and power, rather than being opposites, could be combined to create something greater than either could achieve alone. Modern political scientists are just beginning to understand the sophistication of these ancient systems. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed the extent to which Egyptian palace complexes were designed around psychological principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the development of modern behavioral science. Their understanding of group dynamics, individual motivation, and social influence was centuries ahead of their time. The question that haunts historians is how much of this knowledge was lost when these civilizations fell. How many techniques for understanding and influencing human behavior disappeared into the sand along with the palaces that housed them? How much wisdom about the integration of personal relationships and political strategy was buried with the queens and pharaohs who perfected these arts? What we do know is that the romantic courts of ancient Egypt represented one of humanity's most ambitious experiments in combining individual fulfillment with collective achievement. They created systems that honored both personal desire and political necessity, that celebrated both individual uniqueness and social harmony, that recognized both human passion and divine responsibility. Their story reminds us that love and power, rather than being eternal enemies, can be partners in creating the kinds of extraordinary human achievements that echo across millennia. In the golden chambers of their palaces, along the eternal banks of the Nile, they wrote the first chapters of a story about human potential that we're still learning to read. The sophistication of these romantic operations reached its absolute pinnacle during the New Kingdom period, when Egyptian pharaohs controlled an empire stretching from Nubia to the Euphrates River. Managing such vast territories required diplomatic finesse that went far beyond traditional military conquest, and the royal bedchambers became the nerve centers of international relations. Consider the daily reality of managing romantic relationships that carried the weight of entire civilizations. When Pharaoh Thutmose III married a Mitanni princess, he wasn't just gaining a wife, he was incorporating an entire intelligence network that stretched across Mesopotamia. Her servants weren't just personal attendants, they were cultural ambassadors who reported back to their homeland about Egyptian military capabilities, economic conditions, and political stability. The wedding ceremonies themselves were masterpieces of psychological warfare disguised as celebration. Egyptian marriage rituals were designed to overwhelm foreign dignitaries with displays of wealth and power that would make resistance seem futile. The bride would arrive in Alexandria after a journey that showcased Egyptian engineering marvels. Perfectly maintained roads, efficient supply systems, and military escorts that demonstrated both protection and subtle threat. The ceremony would begin before dawn, with purification rituals in temple complexes that dwarfed anything the visitors had seen in their homelands. Priests chanting in ancient languages, incense burning in quantities that represented more wealth than most kingdoms possessed, sacred animals parading through courtyards that could hold thousands of spectators. By the time the actual wedding began, foreign witnesses were already psychologically prepared to accept Egyptian supremacy. But the real genius emerged in the private ceremonies that followed the public displays. Egyptian wedding traditions included intimate rituals that bonded not just the couple, but their entire extended families and political networks. The bride's female relatives would spend days in the palace, participating in beauty treatments, storytelling sessions, and religious ceremonies that gradually integrated them into Egyptian court culture. These weren't just social pleasantries. They were sophisticated indoctrination programs that transformed potential enemies into enthusiastic allies. A Nubian princess's mother might arrive suspicious of Egyptian intentions, but after spending a week being pampered in luxury beyond her wildest dreams, while learning about Egyptian philosophy, art, and religion, she would return home as an advocate for closer ties with the pharaoh. The architecture of the wedding chambers reflected this diplomatic complexity. The bridal suite wasn't just a bedroom, it was a carefully designed environment for cultural fusion. Egyptian decorative elements were combined with artistic traditions from the bride's homeland, creating spaces that felt both exotic and familiar. Furniture incorporated woods, metals, and textiles from multiple regions, demonstrating Egyptian wealth while honoring foreign traditions. The bed itself was often a collaborative artwork, carved by craftsmen from different cultures, working together under Egyptian supervision. A Mesopotamian princess might sleep on cedar from Lebanon, carved by Syrian artisans, decorated with gold from Nubia, and covered in silk from distant trading partners. Every element told a story about Egyptian power while making the bride feel honored and valued. But these romantic diplomatic operations faced constant dangers that would make modern intelligence officers break into cold sweats. Palace records describe assassination attempts disguised as love letters, poison rings hidden in wedding jewelry, and seduction plots designed to extract military secrets during intimate moments. The stakes were so high that palace security developed countermeasures that seem almost paranoid by modern standards. Royal food tasters weren't just protecting against obvious poisons. They were trained to detect subtle mood-altering substances that might make the pharaoh more susceptible to manipulation during romantic encounters. Palace physicians developed antidotes for drugs that could be absorbed through skin contact, protecting against lovers who might try to drug their partners during physical intimacy. Even the perfumes and cosmetics used in romantic situations were carefully monitored. Egyptian chemists understood that certain combinations of aromatic compounds could influence emotions and decision-making. They developed signature scent blends for different political purposes, fragrances that promoted trust for diplomatic negotiations, others that enhanced sexual desire for seduction operations, still others that created feelings of nostalgic loyalty for maintaining long-term relationships. The clothing worn during romantic encounters was equally strategic. Egyptian textile workers created fabrics that were beautiful and sensual while incorporating protective elements, threads made from materials that would change color if exposed to certain toxins, jewelry designed to detect the presence of hostile magic, even makeup that included ingredients believed to protect against psychological manipulation. This constant vigilance created a paranoid atmosphere that could have destroyed the very relationships it was meant to protect. The genius of Egyptian court culture was developing systems that maintained security while preserving the emotional authenticity that made romantic diplomacy effective. They created environments where people could feel safe enough to form genuine bonds while remaining protected against betrayal. The solution involved what we might call layered intimacy. Romantic relationships developed through carefully structured phases, each offering greater access and trust while maintaining appropriate safeguards. A new foreign bride might spend months in preliminary courtship phases where she could demonstrate her sincerity and loyalty before gaining access to truly sensitive information or private spaces. During these courtship phases, she would participate in increasingly intimate activities designed to reveal her true character and intentions. Hunting expeditions where stress would reveal personality traits. Religious ceremonies where spiritual beliefs would become apparent. Artistic collaborations where creative preferences would emerge. Gaming sessions where competitive instincts and strategic thinking would be displayed. Each activity was carefully observed by trained specialists who could interpret subtle behavioral cues. A tendency to cheat at board games might indicate willingness to betray political agreements. Excessive drinking during religious ceremonies could suggest poor judgment or potential security risks. Cruel treatment of servants might reveal character flaws that could create future problems. But these evaluation processes were disguised as entertainment and education, creating experiences that felt like genuine courtship rather than systematic interrogation. The foreign princess would feel like she was being romanced and educated about Egyptian culture, never suspecting that her every reaction was being analysed for political and security implications. The physical spaces where these courtship activities took place were themselves part of the evaluation system. Different rooms were designed to create specific psychological pressures that would reveal particular personality traits. Chambers, with complex acoustic properties where whispered conversations could be overheard. Gardens with hidden observation posts where private moments could be monitored. Even bathing facilities where the removal of clothing and jewellery would reveal concealed weapons or magical protection devices. The furniture and decorative elements in these spaces served multiple functions beyond mere luxury. Mirrors positioned to allow observers to watch interactions from concealed locations. Beds designed with hidden compartments where security personnel could hide during intimate encounters. Even the artwork on the walls incorporated subtle psychological testing elements, with images and symbols that would provoke specific emotional responses from people with different cultural backgrounds or hidden agendas. This level of surveillance might seem to make genuine romance impossible, but Egyptian court culture developed sophisticated methods for creating authentic, emotional connections within these security frameworks. The key was understanding that true intimacy could coexist with strategic caution, that love could flourish even under conditions of careful observation. Palace records describe romantic relationships that lasted for decades despite being conducted under constant scrutiny. Foreign wives who genuinely fell in love with their Egyptian husbands while maintaining loyalty to their homelands. Pharaohs who developed deep emotional bonds with diplomatic partners while never losing sight of their political objectives. These weren't contradictions, they were examples of emotional sophistication that modern psychology is still trying to understand. The secret lay in creating what we might call transparent intimacy. Rather than trying to hide the political dimensions of romantic relationships, Egyptian court culture openly acknowledged them while developing rituals and traditions that honored both personal feelings and strategic necessities. Couples would participate in ceremonies that celebrated their political partnership alongside their emotional bond. Wedding vows included promises to honor each other's homelands alongside traditional commitments to personal fidelity. Romantic gifts incorporated elements that demonstrated political alliance alongside expressions of personal affection. Even intimate conversations were structured to include discussions of diplomatic matters alongside private emotions, creating relationships where political and personal dimensions were seamlessly integrated. This integration reached its most sophisticated expression in the development of what palace records call sacred marriage traditions. These were romantic relationships explicitly designed to channel divine energy for the benefit of both personal happiness and political stability. Couples would participate in elaborate rituals that positioned their love as a cosmic force that maintained harmony between different regions and cultures. The chambers where these sacred marriage ceremonies took place were among the most beautiful spaces ever created by human civilization. Walls covered in gold leaf that reflected candlelight like captured starlight. Floors made from stones quarried in different provinces, symbolically uniting the entire kingdom under the couple's feet. Ceilings painted with astronomical charts that positioned the lovers' union within the cosmic order of the universe. But these weren't just aesthetic experiences. They were sophisticated psychological programs designed to create emotional states that would enhance both personal satisfaction and political effectiveness. The ceremonies included meditation techniques that promoted empathy and understanding, breathing exercises that synchronized the couple's emotional rhythms. Even physical positions that were believed to channel divine energy through the participants' bodies. The result was romantic relationships that functioned as both personal fulfillment and political alliance, creating bonds strong enough to survive the incredible pressures of ruling ancient empires. These couples didn't just love each other, they became collaborative partners in managing some of the most complex political situations in human history. The daily routines of these power couples revealed just how thoroughly they integrated romance and statecraft. Morning meditation sessions, where they would align their spiritual energies before beginning the day's political activities. Breakfast meetings, where they would discuss regional intelligence reports while feeding each other exotic fruits. Evening rituals, where they would review diplomatic correspondence while massaging perfumed oils into each other's skin. Their private quarters were designed to facilitate this integration, with spaces that could transform seamlessly from intimate retreat to diplomatic conference room. Furniture that could be rearranged to create different atmospheres for different activities. Lighting systems that could shift from romantic ambience to serious discussion environment. Even decorative elements that could be adjusted to reflect different cultural traditions, depending on which foreign dignitaries were being entertained. The servants who maintained these spaces were trained in protocols that honored both the romantic and political dimensions of royal relationships. They knew when to provide privacy for intimate moments and when to remain available for urgent political communications. They could prepare spaces for romantic dinners that might transition into treaty negotiations. They could even serve as discreet messengers when sensitive information needed to be communicated without compromising the romantic atmosphere. This level of integration required extraordinary emotional intelligence from everyone involved. Palace staff had to understand the subtle differences between genuine marital disputes and diplomatic negotiations disguised as personal arguments. They had to recognize when romantic gestures carried political messages and when political discussions reflected personal emotions. The training programs for palace personnel included courses in reading body language, understanding cultural differences, and maintaining discretion under pressure. Servants learned to interpret the subtle signals that indicated when their presence was welcome and when they should withdraw. They studied the personal preferences and cultural backgrounds of different royal wives so they could provide appropriate service without causing offense. But the most challenging aspect of their duties was maintaining the illusion of privacy while ensuring security. Royal couples needed to feel like they could express genuine emotions and share intimate thoughts, but palace security required constant monitoring for potential threats. The solution involved creating what we might call invisible surveillance, observation systems so sophisticated that even the people being watched weren't consciously aware of them. Hidden passages allowed security personnel to monitor conversations without being detected. Specially trained servants who appeared to be focused on routine duties while actually observing and reporting on interactions. Even pets and decorative animals that had been trained to behave in ways that would alert handlers to unusual activities or unauthorized persons. The acoustic engineering of these spaces was particularly sophisticated, with chambers designed to channel sound in ways that allowed observers to hear conversations from concealed locations, while preventing voices from carrying to areas where they might be overheard by unauthorized persons. Some rooms featured what we might call audio illusions, where conversations seemed completely private to the participants, while actually being clearly audible to security personnel. These technical innovations were combined with psychological techniques that encouraged people to reveal information voluntarily rather than trying to extract it through interrogation. Palace culture included traditions of intimate confession, where couples would share secrets and concerns as expressions of trust and love. These conversations provided valuable intelligence while strengthening emotional bonds between partners. The religious dimensions of Egyptian court culture provided additional frameworks for information gathering disguised as spiritual activity. Confession rituals, where individuals would reveal their fears and guilt to priests who were actually intelligence operatives. meditation practices that promoted psychological states where people became more open and communicative, even dream interpretation sessions where subconscious concerns would be revealed through symbolic narratives. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these operations was their sustainability over periods of decades. Modern intelligence agencies struggle to maintain undercover operations for months or years without compromising their effectiveness or destroying the psychological health of their operatives. Egyptian palace culture created systems that could function for entire lifetimes while actually enhancing the personal satisfaction and emotional well-being of everyone involved. The secret lay in understanding that the most effective manipulation is often indistinguishable from genuine care and affection. Palace personnel weren't just pretending to serve their masters, they were creating environments where everyone's needs were genuinely met, while larger political objectives were simultaneously achieved. The foreign princess wasn't being deceived about Egyptian intentions. She was being offered genuine partnership in managing complex international relationships. This approach required a level of emotional maturity and psychological sophistication that seems almost superhuman by modern standards. Palace records describe individuals who could maintain multiple romantic relationships while ensuring that each partner felt uniquely valued and loved. Diplomatic operatives who could form genuine friendships with foreign agents while never compromising their loyalty to Egyptian interests. The training required to develop these capabilities began in childhood and continued throughout entire careers. Young palace servants would spend years learning to read emotional cues, understand cultural differences, and maintain psychological balance under stress. They studied philosophy, psychology, and even what we might call early forms of behavioral science. But the most important part of their education was learning to find genuine satisfaction in serving larger purposes while maintaining their individual identity and emotional health. They weren't being asked to sacrifice their personal happiness for political objectives. They were being taught to find personal fulfillment through contributing to something greater than themselves. This philosophical approach created palace communities where people could pursue individual desires while serving collective needs, where personal relationships could flourish within political frameworks, where love could coexist with power in ways that enhanced both rather than corrupting either. The result was a form of civilization that modern society is still trying to understand and emulate. The physical spaces where this remarkable culture flourished were themselves expressions of this integration between personal and political, individual and collective, human and divine. Palace complexes that felt like private homes while functioning as diplomatic centers. Gardens that provided intimate retreat while serving as venues for international negotiations. Even kitchens that produce meals for romantic dinners while accommodating the dietary restrictions and cultural preferences of visiting dignitaries from across the known world. The daily rhythms of palace life reflected this same integration. Morning routines that began with private intimacy between couples and expanded to include larger household activities and eventually formal court ceremonies. Evening schedules that started with public diplomatic events and gradually contracted into increasingly private romantic encounters. Even sleeping arrangements that honored both individual preferences and security requirements. The seasonal cycles of palace activity were equally sophisticated, with different times of year designated for different types of romantic and political activities. Spring seasons focused on courtship and alliance building. Summer periods emphasized public celebrations and diplomatic entertaining. Autumn months were reserved for more serious negotiations and strategic planning. Winter seasons provided opportunities for the most intimate bonding and private relationship maintenance. These temporal rhythms were coordinated with astronomical observations, agricultural cycles, and religious festivals to create a comprehensive framework for managing both personal relationships and political activities. The result was a lifestyle that felt natural and sustainable, while actually being carefully orchestrated to achieve maximum effectiveness in both romantic and diplomatic domains. The legacy of these ancient innovations extends far beyond their immediate historical impact. Modern relationship counselors are rediscovering techniques for integrating personal and professional life that were perfected in Egyptian palaces thousands of years ago. Contemporary diplomatic services are studying ancient methods for building trust and maintaining long-term international relationships through personal connection and cultural exchange. Even modern architecture and interior design are being influenced by discoveries about how physical environments can be structured to promote both intimacy and productivity, private reflection and collaborative activity. The principle that personal happiness and political effectiveness can reinforce each other rather than competing against each other is being recognized as one of humanity's most important insights into sustainable leadership and social organization. But perhaps the most profound lesson from these ancient masters of romantic statecraft is that human beings are capable of far greater emotional and intellectual sophistication than most modern societies recognize or encourage. The men and women who created and maintained these palace cultures weren't superhuman. They were ordinary people who had been given extraordinary education and opportunities to develop their full potential. Their story suggests that the apparent conflicts between love and duty, personal desire and social responsibility, individual fulfillment and collective achievement might not be inevitable features of human existence. Instead, they might be symptoms of cultural systems that haven't yet learned to integrate these different dimensions of human experience as effectively as the ancient Egyptians managed to do along the banks of the eternal Nile. The morning rituals in these palaces weren't just about getting dressed or eating breakfast. They were elaborate choreographed performances that set the emotional and political tone for entire days. Picture waking up in a chamber where the ceiling has been painted to mirror the exact constellations visible on the night of your birth, where the first rays of sunlight filter through windows positioned to illuminate sacred hieroglyphs that tell the story of your divine destiny. The process of preparing for the day began before dawn, with servants who understood that every detail carried meaning. The water for your morning bath came from specific sections of the Nile, collected at precise times when the river's spiritual energy was strongest. The temperature was calibrated not just for comfort, but to induce psychological states that would enhance your natural charisma and decision-making abilities throughout the coming hours. Even the act of bathing was a form of political theatre. Egyptian bath attendants were trained in massage techniques that could relieve physical tension while simultaneously gathering intelligence through casual conversation. A skilled bath servant could determine your emotional state, identify sources of stress or anxiety, and even detect signs of illness or pregnancy before you were consciously aware of them yourself. The cosmetics applied during these morning rituals weren't random beauty treatments. Each color, each substance, each application technique was chosen based on the day's planned activities and the people you would be encountering. Meeting with Nubian ambassadors required different eye makeup than entertaining Syrian merchants. Hosting religious ceremonies called for completely different preparations than conducting military strategy sessions. The mirrors used during these beauty rituals were themselves marvels of ancient technology, polished to perfection and positioned at angles that would show you exactly how others would see you from different perspectives throughout the day. But more than that, they were psychological tools that helped you mentally prepare for the various roles you would need to perform. You could literally practice different facial expressions and body language while watching yourself transform from private individual to public figure. The clothing selection process revealed the true sophistication of Egyptian court culture. Your wardrobe wasn't just a collection of beautiful garments. It was a carefully curated arsenal of psychological weapons, each outfit designed to create specific impressions and achieve particular objectives. The weight of different fabrics affected how you moved and carried yourself. The colors influenced how others perceived your mood and intentions. Even the jewelry served multiple purposes, from displaying wealth and status to providing subtle protection against various threats. Consider the complexity of dressing for a typical day that might include a dawn religious ceremony, a midday diplomatic reception, an afternoon strategy meeting, and an evening romantic dinner. Each event required different aspects of your personality to be emphasized or concealed. The morning's priestly robes needed to project spiritual authority and divine connection. The diplomatic attire had to balance Egyptian superiority with respectful acknowledgement of foreign customs. The strategic planning outfit required projecting competence and decisiveness. The romantic evening wear needed to create intimacy while maintaining royal dignity. The servants responsible for managing these costume changes weren't just skilled dressers. They were psychological consultants who understood how different clothing affected both the wearer's mental state and observers' perceptions. They knew which combinations of colors and textures would make you feel more confident during difficult negotiations. They understood which styles of jewelry would make foreign visitors more receptive to your proposals. They even recognized which fabrics and cuts would be most flattering under different lighting conditions throughout the day. The transition between these different personas required more than just changing clothes. Egyptian palace culture developed sophisticated techniques for mental and emotional preparation that allowed individuals to authentically embody different roles without losing their core identity. These weren't superficial performances. They were genuine transformations that drew upon different aspects of a fully developed personality. The process began with breathing exercises that could shift your entire psychological state within minutes. Specific patterns of inhalation and exhalation that would promote confidence, compassion, authority, or sensuality, depending on the upcoming situation. These techniques were combined with meditation practices that helped you access the mental and emotional resources needed for different types of interactions. Physical preparation was equally important. Different postures and movement patterns that would reinforce the psychological state you wanted to project. The way you held your head during religious ceremonies differed from your posture during military consultations, which was different again from your bearing during romantic encounters. These weren't arbitrary conventions. They were carefully developed methods for optimizing your effectiveness in different situations. Even your voice required preparation and adjustment. Egyptian court training included extensive vocal exercises that allowed you to modify your tone, pitch, and speaking rhythm to create different impressions. The voice you used for inspiring troops before battle was completely different from the one you employed during intimate conversations with foreign princesses. The vocal patterns for conducting religious rituals bore no resemblance to those used for negotiating trade agreements. The breakfast that followed these morning preparations was itself a masterpiece of strategic consumption. Egyptian palace cuisine wasn't just about nutrition or pleasure, though it provided both in abundance. Every meal was designed to optimize your physical and mental performance for the day's planned activities. Foods that would enhance mental clarity for important negotiations. Combinations that would increase physical stamina for lengthy ceremonies. Ingredients that would promote emotional stability during stressful confrontations. The dining chambers where these meals were consumed were designed to ease the transition from private morning routines to public daily activities. Intimate spaces that felt like extensions of your personal quarters, while gradually introducing elements that prepared you psychologically for interacting with larger groups of people. The lighting gradually brightened as the meal progressed, simulating the natural progression from dawn to full daylight. The acoustic properties allowed for quiet conversation that gradually expanded to include more participants as servants and advisors joined the morning briefings. These breakfast meetings weren't just social occasions. They were intelligence briefings disguised as casual conversation. Your closest advisors would report on overnight developments while appearing to engage in friendly morning chat. Foreign ambassadors who had arrived during the night would be subtly interrogated about conditions in their homelands while being entertained with Egyptian hospitality. Even the servants who prepared and served the meal were trained observers who could report on the behavior and conversations of everyone present. The information gathered during these morning sessions was immediately integrated into the day's strategic planning. A casual comment about crop conditions in a distant province might lead to adjustments in trade negotiations scheduled for that afternoon. An offhand remark about political tensions in a neighbouring kingdom could influence military deployment decisions. Even personal observations about someone's health or emotional state might affect diplomatic seating arrangements or gift selections. This constant flow of information required sophisticated processing and decision-making systems that could adapt to changing circumstances throughout the day. Egyptian palace administration developed methods for rapid communication and coordination that allowed for real-time adjustments to complex plans involving dozens of people and multiple competing objectives. The physical infrastructure supporting these operations was itself a marvel of ancient engineering and organizational science. Hidden passages that allowed messengers to move quickly between different areas of the palace complex without disrupting ongoing activities. Pneumatic tube systems that could deliver written messages instantly across vast distances. Even trained birds that could carry urgent communications to distant locations faster than any human messenger. But the most impressive aspect of these communication networks was their integration with the social and romantic activities that formed the public face of palace life. A casual gesture during a formal dinner might signal the need for immediate military action. A particular piece of jewelry worn to a religious ceremony could convey complex diplomatic messages to observant foreign dignitaries. Even the selection of entertainment for evening gatherings could communicate strategic intentions to those who understood the symbolic language of Egyptian court culture. This integration of operational necessity with social pleasure created a lifestyle that was simultaneously highly efficient and deeply satisfying. Palace residents weren't sacrificing personal enjoyment for political effectiveness. They were finding ways to achieve both through increasingly sophisticated methods of combining work and pleasure, duty and desire, strategic thinking and emotional fulfillment. The afternoon activities in these palaces revealed the full complexity of this integration. Consider a typical diplomatic reception that might begin as a formal ceremony in the main audience hall, transition to a more casual gathering in the palace gardens, and conclude with intimate dinner parties in various private chambers. Each phase required different skills, different preparation, and different objectives, yet the entire sequence needed to flow seamlessly while advancing multiple strategic goals simultaneously. The formal ceremony phase was pure political theatre, designed to overwhelm visitors with displays of Egyptian power and sophistication. The audience hall itself was a statement of cultural superiority that made verbal arguments unnecessary. Visitors would enter through a series of increasingly magnificent chambers, each one larger and more elaborate than anything they had seen in their homelands. By the time they reached the pharaoh's presence, they were already psychologically prepared to acknowledge Egyptian dominance. The throne room ceremonies followed ancient scripts that had been refined over centuries to maximize psychological impact. The pharaoh's entrance was timed to coincide with specific lighting conditions that created an almost supernatural appearance. The positioning of courtiers and guards created visual compositions that reinforced themes of order, power, and divine authority. Even the sequence of speeches and responses was choreographed to build emotional tension toward moments of climactic revelation. But these formal displays were just the opening movement in much longer compositions. As the ceremony concluded and guests were invited to more casual areas of the palace, the real diplomatic work began. The transition from public formality to semi-private conversation was itself a strategic maneuver that caught visitors off guard and made them more receptive to Egyptian proposals. The palace gardens where these transitional activities took place were marvels of landscape architecture designed to promote specific psychological states. Walking paths that encouraged contemplative conversation, water features that provided natural sound masking for sensitive discussions, seating arrangements that created opportunities for both large group interactions and intimate private exchanges. Even the plant selections were chosen for their aromatic properties, with different areas of the garden featuring scents that would promote trust, relaxation, alertness, or romance as needed. The afternoon garden parties weren't random social gatherings. They were carefully orchestrated opportunities for intelligence collection and relationship building. Egyptian hosts would guide conversations toward topics that would reveal useful information about foreign military capabilities, economic conditions, or political situations. Meanwhile, foreign guests would be subtly evaluated for their potential usefulness as allies, trading partners, or sources of ongoing intelligence. The refreshments served during these garden gatherings were themselves forms of soft diplomacy. Egyptian delicacies that demonstrated the kingdom's agricultural wealth and culinary sophistication. Wines from different regions that showed the extent of Egyptian trade networks. Even the serving vessels were selected to display artistic achievements and technological capabilities that would impress foreign visitors. But the real sophistication emerged in how these afternoon activities prepared participants for the evening's more intimate gatherings. The conversations begun in formal ceremonies would continue and deepen during garden walks. The relationships established during public interactions would be tested and developed through increasingly personal exchanges. The strategic objectives identified during official meetings would be pursued through social and romantic connections formed during casual entertainment. The evening transition from public entertainment to private romance was perhaps the most delicate aspect of Egyptian palace operations. The shift from diplomatic reception to intimate encounter required exceptional social skills and psychological sensitivity. Guests needed to feel that the progression was natural and spontaneous, while actually being guided through carefully planned sequences designed to achieve specific objectives. The dining arrangements for these evening gatherings revealed the full artistry of Egyptian hospitality. Tables positioned to create optimal conversation dynamics. Lighting adjusted throughout the meal to promote different emotional states. Entertainment scheduled to provide natural breaks in conversation while reinforcing particular themes or messages. Even the sequence of courses was designed to influence the psychological development of the evening's interactions. The private chambers, where these evenings concluded, were the ultimate expression of Egyptian luxury and strategic thinking. Spaces that felt completely separate from the day's political activities, while actually being designed to continue and complete the diplomatic work begun hours earlier. Bedchambers that provided genuine intimacy while maintaining appropriate security and intelligence gathering capabilities. The morning after these elaborate diplomatic seductions often revealed their true effectiveness. Foreign ambassadors who had arrived suspicious of Egyptian intentions would depart as enthusiastic advocates for closer cooperation. Potential enemies would leave as committed allies. Neutral parties would become active supporters of Egyptian interests throughout their regions. But these transformations weren't achieved through deception or manipulation in any crude sense. They resulted from Egyptian palace culture's sophisticated understanding that political relationships, like personal relationships, flourish when all parties feel genuinely valued and satisfied. The foreign dignitaries weren't being tricked into supporting Egyptian interests. They were being offered genuine partnerships that served their own needs while advancing Egyptian objectives. This approach to international relations required extraordinary patience and long-term thinking. Egyptian palace operations were planned not in terms of immediate tactical advantages, but in terms of strategic relationships that might develop over decades. A young foreign prince entertained at court might not become politically important in his homeland for 20 years, but the positive memories and personal connections formed during his Egyptian visit could influence his decisions throughout his entire career. The record-keeping systems that tracked these long-term relationship investments were marvels of ancient administration. Detailed files on thousands of foreign individuals, updated regularly with information about their changing circumstances, evolving interests, and developing political positions. cross-reference databases that could identify potential connections between different people and predict how changes in one relationship might affect others. These information systems were integrated with the palace's social and romantic activities in ways that seem almost science-fictional by ancient standards. A servant preparing refreshments for a diplomatic gathering would consult records showing the dietary preferences, cultural customs, and personal interests of every expected guest. Entertainment coordinators would select musicians, dancers, and other performers based on detailed knowledge of visitors' artistic tastes and cultural backgrounds. Even the selection of romantic partners for visiting dignitaries involved sophisticated analysis of personality types, cultural expectations, and strategic objectives. Egyptian courtesans weren't just beautiful and charming, they were highly educated specialists who could adapt their approach based on detailed briefings about their assigned partners' psychological profiles and political situations. The training required to operate effectively within airily comprehensive. Palace personnel these systems was extraordinarily needed to master multiple languages, understand diverse cultural customs, maintain detailed knowledge of international political developments, and possess the social skills necessary to navigate complex diplomatic situations. But beyond these technical requirements, they needed the emotional intelligence to form genuine human connections, while never losing sight of larger strategic objectives. The career development paths within Egyptian palace culture provided opportunities for advancement that rewarded both personal excellence and contribution to collective success. Talented individuals could rise from humble service positions to become trusted advisors, diplomatic representatives, or even romantic partners of ruling pharaohs. But these promotions weren't just based on individual achievement. They required demonstrated ability to enhance the effectiveness of the entire palace operation. This merit-based advancement system created incentives for cooperation and mutual support that reinforced the palace culture's emphasis on integrating personal satisfaction with political effectiveness. People weren't competing against each other for scarce opportunities. They were collaborating to create an environment where everyone's talents could be fully utilized and rewarded. The result was a form of civilization that seems almost utopian by modern standards. Yet the archaeological evidence confirms that it actually existed and functioned successfully for over 3 millennia. Egyptian palace culture created sustainable systems for managing some of the most complex political challenges in human history while providing genuine satisfaction and fulfillment for everyone involved. The physical spaces where this remarkable culture flourished continue to inspire wonder and admiration thousands of years after their abandonment. Palace ruins that still convey a sense of the luxury and sophistication that once characterized daily life along the Nile. Temple complexes that demonstrate the integration of spiritual, political, and romantic activities that made Egyptian court culture so uniquely effective. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of these ancient masters of romantic statecraft lies not in their monuments, but in their demonstration that human beings are capable of creating societies where individual desires and collective needs reinforce rather than conflict with each other. Their story suggests possibilities for organizing human relationships and social institutions that modern civilization has barely begun to explore. The techniques they developed for combining love and power, pleasure and responsibility, individual fulfillment, and social contribution remain relevant today as we face our own challenges in creating sustainable and satisfying ways of living together on this planet. Their example reminds us that the apparent conflicts between personal happiness and public service might not be inevitable features of human existence, but rather symptoms of cultural systems that haven't yet learned to integrate these different dimensions of human experience as skillfully as the ancients managed along the eternal banks of the Nile. The sunset ceremonies that concluded each day of palace life were perhaps the most breathtaking displays of how Egyptian court culture transformed routine activities into transcendent experiences. As the sun god Ra completed his daily journey across the heavens, the palace would transform itself into a living temple, where every resident became a participant in cosmic drama that connected earthly romance with divine mystery. Picture the great terraces of Memphis as evening approached, with hundreds of oil lamps being lit in precise sequences that created patterns visible from miles away. These weren't random decorative choices. They were astronomical calculations that aligned the palace's evening illumination with specific constellations and planetary positions. Foreign visitors would find themselves surrounded by flickering lights that seemed to mirror the heavens themselves, creating the sensation that they had somehow ascended from the mortal realm into the dwelling place of the gods. The evening transformation began in the late afternoon with servants who understood that their preparations were actually sacred rituals disguised as household maintenance. The polishing of silver mirrors wasn't just cleaning, it was preparing instruments that would capture and reflect the golden light of sunset in ways that made everyone appear divinely beautiful. The arrangement of flower petals wasn't mere decoration, it was the creation of aromatic mandalas that would influence the emotional states of everyone who encountered them. Even the seemingly mundane task of preparing evening meals became an exercise in alchemical transformation. Egyptian palace kitchens operated according to principles that combined nutritional science with mystical philosophy, creating dishes that were designed to nourish not just the body, but the soul. Spices imported from across the known world were combined according to recipes that had been refined over centuries to produce specific psychological and spiritual effects. The dining chambers where these evening feasts took place were themselves masterpieces of multi-sensory design. Tables carved from single pieces of rare wood that had been seasoned with aromatic oils for decades before being shaped into furniture. Chairs positioned at precise angles that would optimize conversation dynamics while ensuring that every guest could see and be seen to maximum advantage. Even the eating utensils were crafted from materials chosen for their symbolic properties as well as their practical functions. The progression of an evening meal in these palace dining chambers followed choreographed sequences that built emotional and psychological tension toward climactic moments of revelation or decision. The first courses might consist of light appetizers served on precious metals, while musicians played gentle background melodies that promoted relaxation and openness. As the evening progressed, the foods would become more substantial and complex, the serving vessels more elaborate, and the entertainment more dramatic and emotionally engaging. But the true artistry emerged in how these dining experiences facilitated the complex social and political interactions that were their underlying purpose. Seating arrangements that would naturally promote certain conversations while discouraging others. Timing, of course, presentations that created opportunities for private exchanges during service transitions. Even the selection of wines was calibrated to influence the emotional development of different relationships throughout the evening. The palace wine cellars were themselves wonders of ancient engineering and connoisseurship. Underground chambers carved from limestone and maintained at precise temperatures that would preserve and enhance the flavors of vintages from across the Mediterranean world. But beyond their technical sophistication, these cellars represented libraries of liquid emotion, with different wines selected and aged to produce specific psychological effects when consumed in particular combinations. Egyptian wine masters understood that alcohol wasn't just a pleasant intoxicant. It was a powerful tool for social engineering that could be used to lower psychological defenses, enhance emotional connections, and facilitate the kinds of intimate conversations that formed the basis of lasting political alliances. The selection of wines for different evening gatherings required the same careful consideration that modern military strategists apply to choosing weapons for specific missions. A diplomatic dinner designed to convert potential enemies into allies might begin with light, sweet wines that would promote feelings of warmth and friendship, progress to more complex vintages that would encourage deeper conversation and mutual understanding, and conclude with rare ceremonial wines that would create shared experiences of transcendence and spiritual connection. The entire evening's emotional arc would be carefully orchestrated through the progressive consumption of different alcoholic preparations. The entertainment that accompanied these wine-enhanced dining experiences represented the pinnacle of ancient performance art. Egyptian court musicians weren't just skilled performers, they were psychological manipulators who understood how different musical modes and rhythmic patterns could influence human emotions and behavior. A single evening's entertainment might include compositions designed to inspire courage, promote romantic feelings, encourage philosophical reflection, and facilitate political cooperation, all seamlessly woven together in performances that felt spontaneous and emotionally authentic. The dancers who performed during these evening gatherings were equally sophisticated in their understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Their movements weren't just aesthetically pleasing, they were carefully choreographed to tell stories, convey political messages, and create emotional responses that would support the evening's diplomatic objectives. A dance celebrating the marriage of river and desert might subtly reinforce themes of political unity between different regions. A performance depicting the love affair between gods and mortals could prepare audiences psychologically for romantic encounters that would follow the formal dinner. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these evening entertainments was their ability to function simultaneously as art, diplomacy, and intelligence gathering. Foreign guests would reveal their cultural values and political priorities through their reactions to different performances. Their preferences for certain types of music or dance would provide insights into their psychological makeup and potential vulnerabilities. Even their choice of companions for various entertainment activities would yield valuable information about their personal relationships and political alliances. The physical spaces where these evening activities took place were designed to facilitate this multi-layered functionality. Performance areas that could be reconfigured to create different atmospheres for different types of entertainment. Seating arrangements that promoted both group participation and intimate conversation. Acoustic properties that allowed performers to be heard clearly while enabling private exchanges between audience members. The transition from public entertainment to private romance was orchestrated with the same attention to psychological detail that characterized every aspect of Egyptian palace culture. As evening gatherings naturally fragmented into smaller groups, the palace's architectural design provided a seamless progression of spaces that became increasingly intimate and private. Guests would find themselves drawn naturally from large performance halls to smaller conversation chambers to private gardens to individual quarters, with each transition feeling spontaneous while actually being carefully guided. The private chambers where these evenings concluded were the ultimate expression of Egyptian understanding of human psychology and romantic desire. These weren't just bedrooms, they were carefully designed environments for emotional and physical transcendence that made ordinary human encounters feel like participation in divine mysteries. The lighting systems alone represented centuries of experimentation in creating optimal conditions for romantic connection and psychological intimacy. Egyptian lamp designers understood that different colors and intensities of light could influence human mood and behavior in profound ways. The private chambers featured complex illumination systems that could be adjusted throughout the evening to promote different emotional states. The warm, golden light of sunset might gradually transition to the cooler, more mysterious illumination of moonlight, then shift again to the soft, rosy glow of dawn, creating a complete cycle of romantic ambience that enhanced the natural rhythms of human intimacy. The furniture in these private chambers was designed with equal attention to psychological effect. Beds that weren't just comfortable sleeping surfaces, but sacred altars where human love could connect with cosmic forces. Chairs and couches positioned to create optimal conversational dynamics while providing opportunities for increasingly intimate physical contact. Even storage furniture was crafted to enhance the romantic atmosphere, with containers for perfumes, oils, and jewelry that became part of the ritual preparation for intimate encounters. The textiles used in these private spaces represented the pinnacle of ancient luxury craftsmanship, but their selection was based on much more than mere aesthetic appeal. Different fabrics were chosen for their tactile properties, their aromatic qualities, and their symbolic associations. silk imported from distant lands that felt like liquid against the skin, while carrying the exotic fragrances of far-off places. Linen woven from flax grown in sacred temple gardens and blessed by priests before being fashioned into sheets and curtains. Even the dyes used to colour these fabrics were selected for their mystical properties, as well as their visual impact. The morning after rituals that followed these intimate evening encounters were equally sophisticated in their understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Egyptian palace culture recognized that the transition from romantic intimacy back to public political activity required careful management to preserve both personal satisfaction and strategic advantage. The private chambers featured bathing facilities and dressing areas designed to help participants process their emotional experiences while preparing to resume their public roles. The servants who assisted with these morning transitions were trained in what we might call therapeutic hospitality, providing emotional support and practical assistance while gathering intelligence about the success of the previous evening's romantic diplomacy. A skilled morning attendant could determine whether a romantic encounter had achieved its intended political objectives while helping participants feel pampered and valued rather than used or manipulated. The breakfast meetings that followed these intimate evenings were masterpieces of diplomatic subtlety, where the emotional connections formed during private encounters were gradually transformed into political alliances and strategic partnerships. The progression from pillow talk to policy discussion required exceptional skill from all participants, who needed to maintain the authenticity of their personal feelings while advancing their political objectives. The dining chambers where these morning-after meetings took place were designed to ease this delicate transition. Intimate spaces that maintained the romantic atmosphere of the previous evening while gradually introducing elements that prepared participants for the day's public activities. The lighting would slowly brighten from the soft glow of early morning to the clear illumination needed for serious discussion. The furniture arrangements would subtly shift from romantic intimacy to collaborative consultation. The foods served during these morning meetings were carefully selected to support both physical recovery from the previous evening's activities and mental preparation for the coming day's challenges. Exotic fruits that provided energy and mental clarity, herbal teas that promoted emotional balance and psychological stability. Even the presentation of these morning meals was designed to reinforce the positive feelings generated during romantic encounters while transitioning participants back into their political roles. The intelligence gathered during these morning after sessions was often the most valuable product of Egyptian romantic diplomacy. People who had shared intimate experiences were more likely to reveal sensitive information about their homelands, their political allegiances, and their strategic concerns. The emotional bonds formed during romantic encounters created opportunities for intelligence collection that would have been impossible through conventional diplomatic channels. But Egyptian palace culture's genius lay in ensuring that this intelligence gathering didn't compromise the authenticity of the romantic relationships that made it possible. The morning after conversations weren't interrogations disguised as pillow talk. They were genuine exchanges between people who had formed real emotional connections, and were now exploring how those personal bonds might translate into political cooperation. The long-term relationship management that followed these initial romantic diplomatic encounters represented perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Egyptian court culture. The palace maintained detailed records of every significant romantic relationship, tracking their emotional development, political implications, and strategic potential over periods of years or even decades. Former lovers who had returned to their homelands remained part of extensive networks that provided ongoing intelligence and diplomatic influence across the ancient world. The correspondence systems that maintained these long-distance romantic relationships were marvels of ancient communication technology. Encrypted messages that appeared to be personal love letters, while actually conveying sensitive political information. Gift exchange networks that facilitated both romantic gestures and intelligence operations. Even the selection of messengers for these communications was based on their ability to convey subtle emotional and political nuances that written words alone couldn't capture. The palace workshops that created these romantic diplomatic gifts represented the pinnacle of ancient craftsmanship and psychological manipulation. Jewelry designed to remind recipients of specific intimate moments while conveying political messages to anyone who understood the symbolic language of Egyptian court culture. Perfumes blended to evoke emotional memories while demonstrating Egyptian chemical sophistication to foreign courts. Even clothing and textiles were crafted to maintain romantic connections while showcasing Egyptian artistic and technological superiority. The seasonal cycles that governed these long-term romantic diplomatic operations were coordinated with agricultural patterns, religious festivals, and political developments across the ancient world. Spring gifts that would arrive to coincide with planting seasons and renewal ceremonies. Summer communications timed to influence military campaign planning. Autumn messages designed to affect harvest negotiations and trade agreements. Winter correspondence that would provide emotional warmth during the coldest and most politically dangerous months. The training programs that prepared Egyptian palace personnel for these complex, long-term relationship management operations were as sophisticated as anything found in modern diplomatic academies. Students learned to maintain emotional authenticity while pursuing strategic objectives. They mastered the subtle arts of cross-cultural communication and long-distance relationship maintenance. They even studied what we might call early forms of psychology and behavioral science to enhance their effectiveness in managing human relationships for political purposes. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these training programs was their emphasis on personal development and emotional intelligence. Egyptian palace culture recognized that people who were satisfied and fulfilled in their own lives were more effective at creating satisfaction and fulfillment for others. The diplomatic courtesans and romantic operatives who implemented these policies weren't sacrificing their personal happiness for political objectives. They were finding ways to achieve both through increasingly sophisticated integration of individual desires and collective needs. The career paths available within this system provided opportunities for advancement that rewarded both personal excellence and contribution to the broader success of Egyptian civilization. Talented individuals could rise from humble service positions to become trusted advisors, diplomatic representatives, or even romantic partners of ruling pharaohs. These promotions were based on demonstrated ability to enhance the effectiveness of Egypt's romantic diplomatic operations while maintaining the personal integrity and emotional authenticity that made those operations possible. The retirement and pension systems for these diplomatic personnel were equally sophisticated, providing ongoing support and recognition for people who had devoted their lives to serving Egyptian interests through romantic and social relationships. Former palace courtesans might retire to comfortable estates where they could continue to provide intelligence and diplomatic services while enjoying the fruits of their years of dedicated service. The legacy of these ancient masters of romantic diplomacy extends far beyond their immediate historical impact. Modern relationship counselors are rediscovering techniques for maintaining long-distance relationships that were perfected along the banks of the Nile thousands of years ago. Contemporary diplomatic services are studying ancient methods for building trust and maintaining international cooperation through personal connection and cultural exchange. Even modern hospitality and entertainment industries are being influenced by discoveries about how physical environments and social activities can be structured to promote both individual satisfaction and collective objectives. The principle that personal relationships and political effectiveness can enhance each other, rather than competing against each other, continues to offer insights relevant to contemporary challenges in leadership, diplomacy, and social organization. The archaeological evidence for these remarkable achievements continues to emerge from excavations along the Nile, revealing the physical infrastructure that supported one of history's most sophisticated experiments in integrating love and power. Palace complexes that demonstrate unprecedented understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Artistic treasures that reveal the aesthetic sophistication that made Egyptian court culture so irresistibly attractive to foreign visitors. even everyday objects that show how thoroughly these principles were integrated into the daily lives of ordinary palace residents. But the most profound legacy of Egyptian romantic diplomacy may be its demonstration that human beings are capable of creating social institutions that honor both individual desires and collective needs, that celebrate both personal fulfillment and public service, that recognize both human passion and political responsibility. Their story suggests that the apparent conflicts between love and duty, pleasure and purpose, individual happiness and social contribution might not be inevitable features of human existence, but rather challenges that can be resolved through sufficient creativity, wisdom, and commitment to the full development of human potential. The evening stars that witness these ancient romantic dramas continue to shine over the ruins of Memphis and Thebes, silent testimony to a civilization that achieved something remarkable in the long history of human attempts to organize society in ways that serve both individual and collective flourishing. Their legacy reminds us that the search for sustainable and satisfying ways of living together on this planet might benefit from studying not just their monumental achievements in architecture and engineering, but their even more impressive accomplishments in the subtle arts of human relationship and social harmony. The whispered conversations that once echoed through those golden palace corridors, the intimate encounters that shaped the destiny of nations, the romantic intrigues that built and toppled empires, all serve as reminders that love itself, when elevated to an art form and integrated with wisdom and purpose, becomes one of humanity's most powerful tools for creating the kinds of civilizations that endure, not just in stone and metal, but in the collective memory of what human beings can accomplish when they learn to honor both the desires of the heart and the needs of the world. The dawn rituals that prepared these palace inhabitants for another day of romantic warfare were themselves elaborate productions that would make modern spa treatments look primitive by comparison. Imagine beginning each morning in chambers where the very air had been perfumed overnight by servants who burned specific combinations of resins and flowers calculated to enhance your natural pheromones. The awakening process wasn't jarring or abrupt. It was a gradual ascension from sleep that felt like emerging from divine dreams into an even more extraordinary reality. The palace architects had positioned the royal sleeping chambers to capture the first rays of sunlight at precisely calculated angles, creating natural alarm clocks that would gently illuminate different areas of the room as the sun rose. But this wasn't just practical engineering. It was spiritual choreography designed to align the occupants' awakening with cosmic rhythms that would optimize their charisma and decision-making abilities throughout the coming day. The bed linens themselves were works of art that served multiple strategic purposes. Fabrics woven from threads so fine they felt like captured moonbeams against the skin, dyed with pigments that would subtly influence the mood of anyone who saw or touched them. The colors weren't chosen randomly. They were selected and recognized how different hues could affect humans based on ancient understanding of color psychology, their emotions and behavior. Royal blue to project authority and wisdom, deep crimson to inspire passion and courage, golden yellow to evoke feelings of divine favor and prosperity. The pillows and cushions scattered throughout these sleeping chambers were filled with aromatic herbs that would continue releasing therapeutic fragrances throughout the night, ensuring that even unconscious hours contributed to the next day's romantic and political effectiveness. Lavender from the Mediterranean hills to promote restful sleep and emotional balance. Rose petals from temple gardens to enhance natural beauty and charm. Even exotic spices from distant trading posts that were believed to increase mental acuity and sexual magnetism. The awakening rituals began before the sleeper was fully conscious, with specially trained servants who could read the subtle signs of emerging awareness and begin their preparations accordingly. These weren't ordinary household staff. They were specialists in what we might call therapeutic hospitality. Individuals who understood that the transition from sleep to wakefulness was a crucial opportunity to establish the emotional and psychological tone for the entire day. The first sounds that reached the awakening royal were never harsh or jarring. Instead, carefully selected musical compositions would begin playing softly in adjacent chambers, gradually increasing in volume and complexity as consciousness returned. These weren't random entertainment choices. They were precisely calibrated psychological tools designed to promote specific mental states. Harp melodies to inspire feelings of peace and confidence, flute arrangements to encourage creativity and flexibility, percussion rhythms to build energy and determination. The morning beverages served during these awakening rituals were masterpieces of ancient chemistry that combined nutritional science with mystical philosophy. Herbal teas brewed from plants grown in temple gardens and harvested at specific lunar phases to maximize their psychoactive properties. Fruit juices pressed from produce selected not just for flavor, but for their ability to enhance mental clarity and physical vitality. Even the water used in these preparations came from sacred springs that were believed to carry the blessings of various gods and goddesses. The vessels from which these morning elixirs were consumed were themselves part of the therapeutic process. Cups carved from semi-precious stones that were thought to enhance the properties of whatever they contained. Chalices made from metals that had been blessed in religious ceremonies and infused with protective energies. Even the temperature at which these beverages were served was calculated to optimize their psychological and physiological effects. The bathing facilities where the morning purification rituals took place represented the absolute pinnacle of ancient luxury and therapeutic sophistication. These weren't simple washing areas. They were elaborate temple complexes dedicated to the transformation of ordinary human bodies into vessels worthy of divine inhabitation. The pools themselves were carved from single pieces of rare stone that had been selected for both their aesthetic beauty and their supposed mystical properties. The water that filled these morning baths was never ordinary river water, despite the Nile's sacred status. Instead, it was specially prepared liquid that had been filtered through beds of precious stones, infused with aromatic oils, and blessed by priests who understood the spiritual dimensions of physical purification. Different additives were chosen based on the day's planned activities and the bather's current emotional and physical needs. For diplomatic meetings requiring exceptional charm and persuasiveness, the bathwater might be infused with rose oil and powdered pearls that were believed to enhance natural beauty and charisma. For military strategy sessions demanding clear thinking and decisive action, different combinations of herbs and minerals would be added to promote mental acuity and emotional stability. Even for private romantic encounters, specific aromatic compounds would be selected to heighten sensual awareness and emotional receptivity. The bathing process itself was a carefully choreographed ritual that served multiple purposes beyond mere cleanliness. Trained attendants would use massage techniques that not only relaxed physical tension, but also stimulated energy points that ancient Egyptian medicine believed influenced emotional and mental states. These weren't casual spa treatments. They were sophisticated therapeutic interventions based on centuries of accumulated knowledge about human physiology and psychology. The oils and unguents applied during these morning treatments were themselves marvels of ancient cosmetic chemistry, formulations that had been refined over generations to achieve specific effects on both the wearer and anyone who encountered them. Perfumed oils that would continue releasing attractive fragrances throughout the day, while nourishing the skin and protecting against environmental damage. Aromatic balms that would enhance natural pheromone production, while providing subtle magical protection against various threats. The mirrors used during these morning beauty rituals weren't just functional objects. They were psychological tools designed to prepare the user mentally and emotionally for the day's challenges. Polished to absolute perfection and positioned at angles that would show the most flattering possible reflection, while allowing for detailed examination of every aspect of personal appearance. But more than that, they were instruments for practicing the different facial expressions and body language that would be needed for various social and political interactions. The cosmetic applications that followed these preparatory rituals represented perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Egyptian morning routines. These weren't simple beauty treatments designed to enhance physical attractiveness, though they certainly accomplished that objective. They were complex psychological operations that used color, texture, and symbolic imagery to create specific impressions and achieve particular strategic goals. The famous Egyptian eye makeup wasn't just dramatic decoration. It was a carefully calculated system for enhancing natural charisma